Ladies and gentlemen, the paradox of relationships often leaves us questioning why those who care deeply sometimes act distant or unresponsive. Love, though a profound and transformative force, often invites complexity into human behavior. The truth is, when someone loves you a lot and yet seems to ignore you, it may not be about indifference, but something much deeper within their internal world. Understanding this dynamic requires us to look beyond the surface and explore the unspoken reasons driving this behavior. Sometimes love can be overwhelming, even for the one who gives it. When someone loves deeply, they experience emotions that are intense, raw, and often frightening. Love opens doors to vulnerability, and vulnerability is a space where fears reside. The one who loves you may step back, not because they care less, but because they fear they are too attached, too exposed, or too reliant on your presence. Ignoring you in their minds becomes a defense mechanism to manage the overwhelming emotions they feel. It's their attempt to recalibrate, regain balance, and protect themselves from the intensity of their own love. Another reason people act distant when they care deeply is their need for personal space to process their emotions. Love is a mirror. It reflects back not just affection and connection, but also insecurities, wounds, and fears that we often hide. The more someone loves you, the more they are forced to confront these reflections. If they begin to pull away, it could be because they are dealing with internal struggles they don't know how to share. Stepping back becomes their way of untangling the emotions love brings up within them, giving them room to reflect and heal. It's also important to recognize that some people love intensely, but don't know how to express it effectively. The way they were raised, their past relationships, or their life experiences may have taught them to suppress emotions or avoid connection when things feel too intense. Ignoring you in this case is not a reflection of how they feel about you, but of their lack of emotional tools to manage closeness. They might love you with everything they have, but they don't know how to show up consistently in a way that feels nurturing to you. Another reason for this dynamic lies in the fear of loss. The more you love someone, the more you have to lose. When someone truly values you, the thought of losing you can become overwhelming. To protect themselves from the pain of potential rejection or abandonment, they may act distant or indifferent as a preemptive strategy. It's a subconscious way to create emotional distance so they don't get hurt. Their love runs so deep that it terrifies them, so they choose to ignore you instead of confronting the intensity of their attachment. In some cases, the one who loves you and ignores you is struggling to prioritize themselves. Love has a tendency to consume us when we give too much without balance. The person who ignores you may be stepping back to reconnect with themselves, to reclaim their sense of identity, and to find equilibrium. Loving you deeply doesn't mean abandoning their own growth, and sometimes they feel the need to retreat in order to return stronger, healthier, and better able to love you in the way you deserve. Finally, people sometimes ignore those they love because they are waiting for reassurance or clarity. Love can make people feel insecure, uncertain, or doubtful of their worth. If someone ignores you, it might be because they are quietly observing, hoping to see signs that you love them back with the same intensity. Their silence becomes a test of your feelings, a way to confirm whether the connection is mutual and secure. And in conclusion, when someone who loves you deeply seems to ignore you, don't rush to assume it's because they don't care. Often the opposite is true. Their actions are a reflection of their inner struggles, fears, and emotional defenses. They might be overwhelmed, afraid of vulnerability, or uncertain of how to express their love. The key lies in patience, understanding, and communication. Sometimes stepping back is their way of finding clarity and balance so they can return with even deeper love. Remember, love is complex, but it's always worth the effort to understand and nurture it. When someone loves deeply, they experience emotions that can feel overwhelming. Love is a force that invites vulnerability, and in that vulnerability lies the possibility of both joy and fear. Loving someone opens doors to the unknown, a space where emotions, both beautiful and difficult, are felt at their most intense. For the one who loves you, this depth can sometimes feel like too much. It's not that they don't care. In fact, they care so deeply that they don't always know how to manage the overwhelming nature of their feelings. When love hits a certain intensity, it begins to challenge the way we see ourselves and others. The person who loves you a lot may find themselves in unfamiliar emotional territory, grappling with feelings they haven't encountered before. Perhaps they've spent much of their life guarding their heart, protecting themselves from getting too attached or too invested. Then you come along and everything changes. You awaken feelings they may have buried, avoided, or denied for years. Suddenly, the walls they built to stay safe no longer hold. Love challenges those walls. It invites them to let go, to open up, and to risk being seen. But that's not always an easy task. The more someone loves you, the more afraid they become of losing you. Think about that for a moment. It's a paradox. Love, which is meant to connect us, also has the power to make us feel vulnerable and exposed. The person who cares for you may worry about how deeply they've invested in the connection. What if it's taken away? What if their feelings are too much for you to handle? These fears aren't always rational, but they feel real to the one experiencing them. To regain a sense of control, they pull back. They ignore you not because they don't want you in their life, but because they are trying to navigate the tidal wave of emotions that loving you has brought to the surface. Sometimes this retreat is subconscious. They might not even realize they're doing it. Love has activated something within them, old fears, insecurities, or patterns they haven't yet confronted. The intensity of their feelings can trigger an instinct to step back and create emotional space. It's their way of recentering, of trying to regain balance so that they don't lose themselves in the process of loving you. It's important to understand that this behavior doesn't stem from a lack of love. In fact, it's often because they love you so much that they feel the need to retreat and collect themselves. Ignoring you may also be an attempt to slow things down. Love, when it's deep and powerful, can feel like it's moving at a pace that's hard to keep up with. They may feel the need to pause, to catch their breath, to understand what's happening within them. It's not rejection, it's a recalibration. The silence is their way of processing what this connection means to them and what it's bringing up within their inner world. The important thing to remember is that love doesn't always express itself in the ways we expect. When someone loves deeply, they are human, they experience fears, doubts, and uncertainties. Their emotional response to love may not align with the story you have in your mind. But that doesn't mean their feelings aren't genuine. In fact, it's often the depth of their emotions that creates the need for space. Their actions, though confusing, can be an opportunity for growth, for them to understand themselves better, and for you to practice patience and understanding. If you find yourself in this situation, don't jump to conclusions. Instead of assuming the worst, consider the possibility that their love is so strong that it's shaking their foundations. Recognize that silence doesn't always mean indifference. Sometimes it's a sign that their heart is working through something profound. It's in these moments of uncertainty that love can deepen, because it asks you to trust, to hold space, and to believe in the strength of the connection. In the end, the one who loves you a lot may ignore you, because love is a transformative experience. It challenges them, stretches them, and invites them to confront parts of themselves they didn't know existed. When someone steps back, it doesn't mean the love is fading, it means they are learning to carry it. Trust in that process. Trust that love, even when it's quiet, is still present. And trust that when they return, they will love you with even greater clarity and intention. Love has a way of acting as a mirror, reflecting back to us the parts of ourselves that we may have hidden, ignored, or buried deep within. When someone loves you deeply, their connection to you becomes a source of reflection, and this can stir up emotions they aren't prepared to face. The more they love you, the more they are confronted with their own insecurities, wounds, and unresolved fears. This isn't because of you. It's because love has the power to awaken what's dormant inside of us. And sometimes in response, they step back. They ignore you, not out of a lack of care, but because they are grappling with the emotional truth that love reveals within them. You see, most people walk through life carrying experiences they haven't fully processed: rejections, disappointments, or fears of abandonment. These moments may not always be obvious, but they are stored within the subconscious mind. Love has a way of bringing all of these feelings to the surface. It asks us to be open, vulnerable, and present with another person. And that requires confronting the parts of ourselves we've kept hidden. When someone loves you, they begin to feel the depth of the bond they have with you. And this bond has the ability to make them feel exposed, unsure, or even afraid of what it's revealing. When someone ignores you in this way, it's not about you, it's about the relationship they have with themselves. They may pull away because being close to you forces them to look inward, to examine their own worthiness, and to question whether they're ready for what this love requires of them. It's not easy for everyone to sit with their emotions or their vulnerabilities. So instead of staying present, they take a step back. They ignore you not because they love you less, but because they are wrestling with the mirror that love is holding up. In many ways, this retreat is a defense mechanism. It's a way for them to protect themselves from the intensity of what they're feeling. Love has created a new level of emotional exposure, and not everyone is equipped to handle that level of openness right away. By pulling back, they are subconsciously trying to regain control over their feelings. They feel overwhelmed, unsure of how to navigate this emotional terrain, so they retreat to what feels familiar: distance, silence, or avoidance. It's their way of protecting themselves, even if it doesn't make sense to you. It's also important to recognize that love reveals the fear of loss. The deeper their feelings, the more they begin to fear what would happen if they lost you. What if they're not enough? What if they give everything and still end up with nothing? These fears aren't logical, but they are powerful. Ignoring you becomes their way of reducing the risk, of not getting too close so that the possibility of pain feels less likely. It's a misguided form of self-protection, but it's real to the one experiencing it. However, there's something you must remember: stepping back doesn't mean they don't care. Love, especially when it's deep and real, has a way of forcing people to evolve. It challenges them to let go of their fears, their insecurities, and the stories they've told themselves about relationships. And sometimes that evolution requires space. It requires them to step away and sort through the emotions that loving you has awakened. This space isn't a sign of failure. It's part of the process. It's part of their growth. If you find yourself feeling ignored by someone who loves you, don't rush to assume the worst. Take a step back yourself and remember that love is not always linear. It doesn't always look the way we expect it to. People are on their own journeys, and sometimes they need time to face what love is bringing up inside of them. That doesn't mean the love isn't real. And it doesn't mean the connection is broken. It means they are learning to navigate the emotions that love has stirred within them. In the end, love is a teacher. It teaches us about connection, but it also teaches us about ourselves. When someone steps back, it's not always rejection, it's often growth in disguise. It's their way of finding clarity, strength, and emotional balance. Trust that process. Trust that love, even when it seems distant, is still doing its work. And when they're ready, they'll return more present, more aware, and more capable of loving you in the way you deserve. When someone loves you deeply but ignores you, it can feel confusing, even painful. But the truth is, love operates on levels that go far beyond the surface. For someone who truly cares, the depth of their emotions can be overwhelming. Sometimes their need to step back is not about a lack of love, but rather the intensity of it. Love challenges people in ways they may not expect. It brings up questions like, am I worthy of this connection? Can I handle this closeness? What if I fail? What if I lose them? These questions can feel like too much, and as a result, they pull away not because they don't want to love you, but because they're learning how to. You see, love is not just about the other person. It's also a reflection of ourselves, our fears, our past experiences, and our beliefs about what we deserve. For the person who loves you, their feelings for you might trigger insecurities they didn't even know they had. Maybe they've been let down before, or perhaps they've built walls to protect themselves from getting too close. But when someone loves you deeply, those walls start to crumble. That vulnerability can be terrifying for them. Love is calling them to open up to trust and to risk the possibility of hurt. And so their first instinct may be to step back, to retreat into the safety of silence or distance because they're not yet ready to face the emotional truth that comes with loving you. In some ways, ignoring you is their way of buying time. It's not always a conscious choice. They may not sit down and decide to distance themselves from you. It's often a subconscious reaction to the unfamiliar territory they're navigating. Love has a way of pushing people beyond their comfort zones. It asks them to let go of control and surrender to something larger. But not everyone is ready to take that leap, even if their heart is in the right place. Ignoring you becomes their attempt to process what they're feeling. It's their way of taking a pause so they can understand the depth of their emotions. Sometimes the silence comes from fear of failure. Loving you deeply means they care about what happens to the relationship. They don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to say the wrong thing or fall short of your expectations. And that pressure, real or imagined, can cause them to freeze. Instead of communicating, they choose distance. It's not because they don't value you. It's because they're afraid of not being good enough for you. The irony, of course, is that their silence often makes you question their love, when in reality it's proof of how much you mean to them. The person who ignores you out of love is also battling with their own identity. Love has a way of shifting how we see ourselves. It reveals both the light and the shadows within us. For someone who has always been independent, self-reliant, or guarded, loving you might feel like losing a part of themselves. They may fear that the connection will consume them, that they'll lose control over their own emotional state. And so they create distance not to punish you, but to recenter themselves. It's their way of making sure they can still stand strong while loving you at the same time. In moments like this, it's important to respond with patience and understanding. When someone loves you but steps back, they're not always rejecting you. They're learning how to love you in a way that feels safe for them. They're growing through the process, even if that growth requires space. Your role is not to chase after them or demand explanations. Your role is to hold space for their process while staying grounded in your own self-worth. Remember, their silence is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their inner journey. At its core, love is about transformation. It invites people to evolve, to heal, and to become more of who they truly are. For the one who loves you, stepping back might be their way of answering that invitation. They need time to confront their fears, to embrace their vulnerabilities, and to become someone who can love you with full presence and clarity. Trust that process. Trust that love, when it's real, will always find its way back to you. And when it does, it will be stronger, deeper, and more intentional than before. Because true love is not about perfection, it's about growth. It's about becoming the kind of person who can meet love with courage, not fear. And in the end, love, when nurtured through patience and understanding, always wins. When someone loves you deeply but begins to ignore you, it is not always about indifference or lack of care. More often, it is a result of their own internal battle, a conflict between the intensity of what they feel for you and their ability to manage those emotions. Love is not just a joyful, lighthearted experience. It is a force that challenges us to grow, to heal, and to face truths about ourselves that we may have avoided for years. For some, this kind of awakening is overwhelming, and their instinctive reaction is to pull away. It's not because they don't care. It's because they care so deeply that the feelings become hard to process. Love has a way of holding up a mirror, reflecting parts of ourselves we aren't always ready to see. Perhaps they've spent years burying insecurities, fears, or unresolved wounds from the past. But when real love enters their life, it stirs those buried parts awake. The very act of loving you becomes a catalyst for their emotional growth. And growth, as we know, is not always comfortable. It requires looking inward, addressing fears of failure, rejection, or inadequacy. Instead of embracing the challenge right away, some people choose distance as a coping mechanism. They step back not because they want to hurt you, but because they're wrestling with what love is asking of them. In their silence, they are not forgetting you. They are trying to understand themselves. Loving you has triggered something in them, a realization that they are vulnerable, exposed, and connected to someone in a way they haven't been before. Vulnerability can be frightening, especially for someone who has spent their life avoiding emotional risks. To open one's heart fully is to risk hurt, loss, and disappointment. They may wonder, what if I give everything and it's not enough? What if I let myself fall and they leave me? These fears are often irrational, but to the person experiencing them, they feel real. Ignoring you becomes their way of regaining control over emotions that feel too big, too unfamiliar. Sometimes this behavior is also tied to self-worth. When someone loves you deeply, they begin to see just how valuable you are in their life. And that can lead to questions like, do I deserve this love? Am I enough for them? The fear of not measuring up, of disappointing you or themselves, becomes paralyzing. Instead of facing it head on, they retreat into silence. They convince themselves that it's safer to step back, to create distance, than to risk falling short of the expectations they believe you have. This retreat is not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their own doubts about themselves. But here's what's important to remember: love, even when it feels messy or complicated, is still love. Someone's inability to express it perfectly does not mean it isn't real. If they're stepping back, it means they are grappling with emotions they don't fully understand yet. They are on a journey of self-discovery, one that love has unexpectedly pushed them into. And growth takes time. Their silence may frustrate you, but it is also a sign that their love for you is strong enough to challenge them, to push them beyond their comfort zone. That is not a small thing, it's part of their transformation. The healthiest thing you can do in this situation is to focus on your own inner strength. When someone loves you but pulls away, it's easy to blame yourself, to question whether you did something wrong. But their actions are not about you, they're about their journey. Step back with grace and understanding. Allow them the space they need to process their emotions and find clarity. When you give them that freedom, you're not only showing compassion for their struggle, you're also affirming your own worth. Remember, this real love challenges people to evolve. It pushes them to grow, to heal, and to become better versions of themselves. Sometimes that evolution requires a pause. It requires distance, reflection, and time. Trust the process. If their love is genuine, they will come back to you not as the same person, but as someone more open, more self-aware, and more ready to love you in the way you deserve. And when that happens, the bond you share will be stronger because it will have been forged through patience, understanding, and the courage to grow. When someone loves you deeply yet ignores you, it can be one of the most difficult and confusing experiences to endure. However, what often goes unnoticed in such situations is that their silence speaks volumes not about you, but about them. You see, love has a unique ability to challenge a person in ways they never anticipated. It brings to light emotions they didn't know existed, fears they hadn't yet faced, and insecurities they never dealt with. Their love for you can feel so intense that it overwhelms their system, forcing them into a place of retreat not out of rejection, but as an instinctive defense mechanism. At the core of this behavior lies their internal conflict. Perhaps for the first time, they are standing face to face with real, unfiltered love, something they've never experienced before. For some, this level of connection feels like losing control of their emotional state, and that scares them. They may feel that loving you so deeply leaves them exposed. Their mind races with questions like, what if I lose them? What if I'm not good enough? What if this ends in heartbreak? Instead of working through those feelings, they choose silence as a way to protect themselves from the unknown. It's their armor, their way of saying, I need time to understand what I'm feeling. The irony of this silence is that it's not a reflection of indifference, it's a reflection of how much they care. If they didn't care about you, they wouldn't feel vulnerable at all. They would remain unshaken, unaffected, and unmoved. But the love they feel for you stirs something deeper within them. It forces them to confront parts of themselves they're not proud of: past wounds, trust issues, or insecurities that have been left unchecked for far too long. When those unresolved parts of themselves resurface, they step back not because they don't love you, but because they don't yet know how to love you fully while battling their own inner chaos. Sometimes this silence can be rooted in their fear of failure. Loving you so deeply comes with the responsibility of showing up for you, being present, and being their best self. The pressure to meet those expectations, whether real or imagined, can feel overwhelming. They start to wonder, what if I'm not enough for them? What if I let them down? That fear of falling short paralyzes them. And instead of stepping up, they take a step back. It's not because they want to leave you, it's because they're afraid they'll disappoint you. In other cases, their distance could be tied to their sense of identity. Love, when it's deep and all-encompassing, has a way of shifting how we see ourselves. For someone who's always been fiercely independent, self-reliant, or emotionally guarded, falling in love can feel like losing control. It's as though they're being asked to give up a part of themselves in order to make space for you. That loss of control can feel destabilizing, so they instinctively step back, hoping to regain a sense of balance. It's not rejection, it's a temporary retreat to rediscover who they are while learning how to include you in their life. In moments like this, the most important thing you can do is honor the process without chasing them or demanding explanations. Their journey is not about you, it's about their relationship with themselves. By stepping back with grace, you give them the time and space they need to sort through their emotions. More importantly, you affirm your own worth. You remind yourself that their actions are not a reflection of your value. Love, especially the kind that challenges us to grow, is not always neat or simple. It requires patience, understanding, and the willingness to trust the process. If their love for you is real, they will return not out of obligation, but out of clarity and a renewed sense of readiness. When they do, they'll come back stronger, more open, and more capable of giving you the love you deserve. Real love demands transformation, and transformation takes time. Trust that everything is unfolding exactly as it's meant to, and that true love, no matter how tested, will always find its way back. When someone who loves you deeply begins to ignore you, it's easy to feel confused, hurt, and even rejected. But what you must remember is that love, especially a profound and transformative love, is not always easy for a person to process. Love, at its core, is an awakening. It opens parts of us that have been dormant. It calls forward emotions we didn't know existed, and it asks us to grow into someone better, stronger, and more open. But for many people, that level of love can feel overwhelming. It pulls them out of their comfort zone and into a place where they're forced to confront their fears, doubts, and insecurities. And when they're not ready to face those things, they step back not out of spite, but as a reaction to their own inner struggle. You must understand that this behavior is rarely about you. It's about the love they feel for you being so strong that it destabilizes them. It shakes the foundation they've built for themselves, the stories they tell about who they are, how they love, and how much they think they deserve. When someone has spent years avoiding emotional vulnerability, keeping their walls up to stay safe, or convincing themselves that they are unworthy of a deep connection, real love feels like a threat. It feels as though their world is being turned upside down, and they step back not because they don't care, but because they don't yet know how to handle the magnitude of what they're feeling. Their silence, their retreat, is often a sign of inner conflict. They are processing their emotions, questioning their identity, and trying to make sense of why loving you feels so challenging. For someone who has been hurt before or has unresolved wounds from their past, stepping into love requires them to face their pain head on. It forces them to see where they still need to heal, and that process can feel daunting. Instead of being vulnerable with you, they take the easy way out. They ignore you, believing that distance will help them regain control. But in reality, that distance only reveals just how much they truly care. There's something else to consider here. When someone loves you deeply, they feel a responsibility to be enough for you. They feel the weight of showing up for you in the way you deserve. That pressure can be overwhelming for someone who struggles with self-doubt or fears failure. They may think, what if I let them down? What if I can't give them everything they deserve in their mind? Retreating feels safer than taking the risk of not measuring up. They think they're protecting you from disappointment, when in reality, they're avoiding their own fears. It's important to recognize that this struggle is their own, not yours. Their retreat, their silence is not a reflection of your worth. It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about their own journey and the inner work they need to do to become the person who can meet you where you are. In moments like this, the best thing you can do is step back as well, not out of anger or resentment, but out of self-respect. Give them the time and space to work through their emotions. By doing so, you honor yourself and the love you deserve. And here's the truth: if their love is real and they are willing to grow, they will return. They will come back, not because you chased them or demanded it, but because they have faced their fears and chosen to fight for what truly matters. They will come back stronger, clearer, and ready to love you in the way you need. But even if they don't, you will be okay, because you have stayed true to yourself. You have not allowed their actions to define your value or shake your confidence in what you deserve. Love is not always easy. It is not always comfortable. It is a mirror that forces us to see ourselves as we are ourselves. But for many, that's a difficult process. But true love will always find its way. So trust the journey. Trust that everything is unfolding for your highest good. If they are meant to be in your life, they will return when they are ready. And if not, you will continue to grow, to thrive, and to become even stronger. Love, when it's real, never leaves us weaker. It always leads us toward the person we are meant to become.